Hello there. Tonight we are standing beside a wagon in western Missouri sometime in the middle of the 19th century, with damp spring air on your face, mud under your boots, and far too many belongings arranged in little piles around you. The wagon looks large until you begin trying to fit a household inside it. There are sacks of flour, bacon, beans, coffee, salt, blankets, spare clothing, cooking pots, tools, a water container, maybe a small chest holding the things your family cannot quite imagine abandoning. Every object has weight, and every pound will have to be pulled west by animals for months. That is the first uncomfortable truth of the Oregon Trail. You are not packing for a holiday. You are building a moving survival system. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you feel like it, tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. It is pleasant to imagine all those quiet rooms scattered across different places while we make our way into the past together. Now, dim the lights and take one more look at the wagon. It is probably not the giant covered wagon you may picture from films. Many emigrant families used relatively light farm wagons or wagons adapted for migration, smaller and more practical than the huge freight wagons built for commercial hauling. A family wagon still has to carry a remarkable amount, but it must also cross rough ground, climb grades, descend slopes, ford streams, and survive thousands of jolts. That means weight matters before the journey even begins. You pick up a cast iron pot, useful, heavy. A wooden chair, familiar, awkward. A box of books, valuable to the mind, perhaps less appealing to an ox team climbing toward the Rockies. There is no dramatic emergency yet, no snowstorm, no empty flour sack, no snapped axle, just a family beside a wagon making decisions that may quietly determine what happens months later. Food usually wins. Families did not all carry identical provisions, but the logic was simple. You needed foods that survived without refrigeration, provided substantial energy, and could be cooked with limited equipment. Flour was especially useful. Bacon or other salted meat supplied fat and protein. Beans, rice, cornmeal, dried fruit, coffee, sugar and salt might appear, depending on means and preference. The exact list changes. The weight does not. Then there is water. You cannot simply fill the wagon with enough for the entire crossing. It would be absurdly heavy. Instead, the journey depends on reaching water repeatedly and carrying limited reserves where necessary. People need it. Draft animals need much more of it. Rivers, springs, creeks, muddy pools, and dry stretches are not scenery. They are part of your supply system. The animals are another part. Oxen became especially common because they were steady, strong, and could feed largely on grass along the route, although they were certainly not indestructible. Horses and mules were used too. Whatever pulls your wagon has to eat every day, drink repeatedly, keep its feet and legs sound, and remain strong enough to move the load. So when you add one more chest, you are not merely filling empty space. You are asking an animal to pull it for weeks, then months, over ground that does not care how sentimental the chest is. People discovered this quickly enough. Overland emigrants sometimes discarded belongings as animals weakened, or terrain made excess weight intolerable. Furniture, trunks, tools, books, and other possessions could be left beside the trail. Someone once chose that object because they believed it belonged in their new life. Then the road voted against it. A wagon also needs things that do not feed anyone. Tools, rope, grease, bedding, clothing, cooking equipment, containers, spare materials for repairs. Every useful item competes with every other useful item. That is the mechanism. The wagon is a limited platform. The animals have limited pulling power. The trail adds mud, hills, riverbanks, rocks, ruts, heat and distance. Your family has limited money and limited knowledge of what lies ahead. Packing is therefore a problem of trade-offs. Take bedding. You want thick blankets because cold is not theoretical when you are sleeping outdoors during a freezing night. But blankets are bulky. Clothing matters too. Yet you cannot bring an entire wardrobe. Tools can save you when something breaks, but hauling every tool you own creates its own problem. Even food creates contradictions. Carry too little and hunger becomes obvious. Carry too much and your animals suffer. The best load is not simply the largest one. It is the load that survives motion. Modern travel teaches us to think of packing as a question of storage. Does it fit in the suitcase? Does the trunk close? On the Oregon Trail, fitting is only the beginning. The better question is whether the whole system can still move after the thing fits. That is one reason many emigrants walked beside their wagons rather than riding inside them all day. The romantic image of a family comfortably bouncing west beneath a white canvas cover is misleading. Wagons were valuable cargo carriers, and people who were able to walk often did. That changes the journey immediately. You are not sitting for 2,000 miles. You are walking through much of it. Your boots matter. Your stamina matters. The animals matter. And the wagon behind you is less a carriage than a rolling storeroom containing the pieces of a household stripped down to survival. There is another quiet problem. You do not know exactly what you will need. Supplies can sometimes be bought along the route, but availability, price, distance and timing vary. You cannot assume that a missing item will politely appear when required. So preparation rewards boring things. Extra flour, a sound wagon wheel, a usable axe, a container that does not leak, a blanket that stays dry, nothing heroic, which, unfortunately for anyone hoping to survive a long migration, is often how survival works. Before departure, the wagon itself needs attention. Wheels, hubs, axles, fittings, yokes, and the load all have to function together. The canvas cover provides some protection from weather, but bedding and provisions still have to be kept dry. Flour ruined by moisture is not merely annoying. It is lost food you hauled for miles. You begin to see the real shape of the Oregon Trail. It is not one long emergency. It is thousands of small systems that must keep working. Food must remain edible. Water must be found. Animals must stay strong. Wheels must keep turning. Blankets must remain useful. People must keep walking. And all of those systems begin here, while you are still deciding whether a heavy piece of furniture deserves space beside the flour. You look at the wagon again. There is still room. That does not mean you should fill it. Because once the family finally moves west, every object has to justify itself, mile after mile. The things that matter most are not necessarily the things that made your old house feel like home. They are the things that keep a moving household alive. And among all of them, food will soon become the most relentless calculation of all. By the time your wagon finally rolls away from Missouri, one fact becomes impossible to ignore. Food is weight. Not metaphorically, literally. Every sack of flour, every slab of bacon, every bag of beans, every little parcel of coffee has to be lifted, packed, protected from rain, carried over rough ground, and pulled by animals for mile after mile. You need enough to survive months of travel, but not so much that the load itself becomes a threat. That is why overland food was usually practical before it was interesting. Flour mattered because it could become several things: bread, biscuits, pancakes, dumplings, or some rough variation depending on what you had left and how tired everyone was. Cornmeal could do similar work. Beans kept well. Rice travelled reasonably well. Salted meat lasted far longer than fresh meat. Dried fruit, sugar, coffee, tea, and other items could add variety and energy if a family could afford the weight and cost. There was no single official Oregon Trail menu followed by every family. Advice books, guidebooks, merchants, previous travelers, household habits, wealth, departure point, and simple personal preference all influenced what went into a wagon. But nearly everyone faced the same mechanism. Food had to survive time. Fresh meat spoils. Milk does not remain pleasantly cooperative for thousands of miles. Vegetables do not sit indefinitely in a hot wagon and wait to be eaten in Oregon. So preservation becomes part of survival. Salt helps meat keep longer. Drying removes moisture that encourages spoilage. Grain and flour can last if protected from dampness, pests, and contamination. Beans are compact, durable, and useful. These are not glamorous technologies, but that is precisely why they matter. You can understand the whole system by looking at one sack of flour. At the beginning, it is heavy. That is inconvenient. Several weeks later, it is lighter. That is reassuring to the oxen and increasingly worrying to you. Every meal makes the wagon easier to pull and the future slightly less secure. This creates a strange rhythm. You are consuming your safety margin every day. Morning comes. Someone builds a fire if fuel is available. Water has to be fetched. Flour may become biscuits or another simple bread. Bacon might be sliced. Coffee might be made, particularly if your household considers civilization worth preserving before sunrise. Then the wagon moves. At midday, the meal may be simple because stopping, unpacking, cooking, repacking, and catching up all cost time. Evening gives you more opportunity, but by then everyone is tired. Food therefore has to be not only durable, but usable. A complicated recipe requiring several pots, delicate ingredients, and an hour of cheerful preparation is less appealing after you have walked beside a wagon all day. You are running a household with fewer surfaces, fewer containers, limited fuel, uncertain water, and weather that occasionally decides dinner should contain extra dust. Not ideal. Fuel becomes a problem on parts of the route where timber is scarce. Along open plains, emigrants could use whatever combustible material was available, including dried buffalo dung in some areas. It may sound like a comic detail from a modern perspective. On a treeless stretch of trail, however, the question is simply whether it burns. If it does, supper has a chance. The food supply also depends on storage. Rain entering a wagon can spoil provisions that were supposed to last weeks. Rodents, insects, dirt, and careless packing all matter because preserved food remains useful only while it stays preserved. So families protect the load as best they can. Goods are arranged, tied, covered, shifted, and checked. The wagon is becoming less like luggage and more like a machine for managing scarcity. And scarcity is never just about quantity. It is also about timing. You may have plenty of flour but little meat. You may have coffee but be short of sugar. You may have beans but not enough dry fuel to cook them comfortably. You may reach a place where supplies can be purchased, only to discover that prices are higher than expected or the selection is poor. Resupply points helped emigrants, but relying on them too confidently could be dangerous. Forts, trading posts, settlements, and other commercial stops might offer food, equipment, repairs, or replacement animals. Yet the route was long, conditions changed, and not every traveller had the same money. Now consider rationing. You do not have to wait until starvation begins before food portions matter. A cautious family watches the supply continuously. How much flour remains? How quickly are you using bacon? How many days until the next likely place to buy more? Has travel slowed? Are you feeding additional people because someone in another wagon is sick or short of provisions? Did a container spoil? Did an animal problem delay the train? Every delay consumes food. This is why distance alone does not determine how long supplies last. Time does. A wagon train covering fewer miles than planned may still be eating at almost the same rate. People continue needing breakfast when a river is too high to cross, They continue needing dinner when a wheel is being repaired. Children continue getting hungry while adults discuss whether the trail ahead is passable. A 3-day delay is also 3 days of food. That can become important much later. Hunting sometimes supplemented provisions, and game animals have become a large part of the popular image of Western migration. But hunting was not a magical food button. It required time, ammunition, skill, and luck. Game was not equally available everywhere, and a successful hunt produced another problem. Meat had to be used or preserved. You cannot build a survival plan around an animal agreeing to appear precisely when your bacon runs low. So stored staples remain the quiet foundation. Flour, beans, salt, fat. Things that look dull in a list and become extremely interesting when you have several hundred miles left to travel. Meals can also shrink gradually enough that nobody announces a crisis. A little less bacon, a smaller portion, more reliance on whatever staple remains abundant. That is often how shortage enters a household, not with a dramatic empty cupboard, but with repeated adjustments. You notice the same sack again. It folds more easily now. There is space where food used to be. The wagon is lighter, which should be good news, except that mountains still lie ahead and the calendar is still moving. And there is another resource you cannot pack in sufficient quantity to solve the entire journey. Water. For people, water is essential. For the animals pulling everything you own, the problem becomes larger still. Which means the next meal is never entirely separate from the next creek, spring, river, or muddy pool waiting somewhere beyond the horizon. Water looks simple until you have to find it every day. At home, you may think of water as something stored in a well, carried from a pump, or waiting in a bucket near the door. On the trail, it becomes a moving target. Every morning, before the wagon can make useful progress, people and animals need to drink. That sounds obvious. The scale is not. A family might be able to ration its own drinking water for a short stretch. The animals pulling the wagon are another matter. Oxen, horses, and mules need large quantities of water, especially in heat, after long travel, or while working hard. You cannot realistically carry enough for them across an entire dry region without turning the wagon into a tank that the animals then have to pull. So the route itself must supply you creeks, rivers, springs, pools, sometimes clear, sometimes muddy, sometimes moving strongly enough to create a new problem. This is why water sources help shape the trail. A route is not merely the shortest line between Missouri and Oregon. It has to connect places where people and livestock can keep functioning. You begin to understand why emigrants followed river valleys for long stretches. Water is there. Grass is often there too. Those two things matter because your wagon is being pulled by living engines. If the animals cannot drink or graze, the entire transportation system begins to fail. Now imagine a hot afternoon. Dust sits on your clothes. Your mouth is dry. The wagon wheels have been grinding forward for hours. Somewhere ahead, someone says there should be a creek. Should is doing a lot of work. Maps and guidebooks could help, as could advice from earlier travellers, local residents, traders, or people coming from the opposite direction. But water conditions changed with weather and season. A stream that was comfortable for one wagon train might be low, muddy, swollen, or difficult for the next. You reach the creek. The animals smell it before you need much encouragement. They want to drink. So do you. But water that looks available is not automatically safe. 19th century emigrants did not understand waterborne disease through the modern germ theory that would become established later. They could recognize that foul or stagnant water was undesirable, and practical advice sometimes warned against bad water, but they did not possess modern testing or treatment systems. That matters because crowded trail camps could contaminate water sources. People bathe. Animals drink. Livestock stand in the shallows. Waste accumulates. Other wagon trains have already passed through. The place where everyone needs water is also the place where everyone gathers. A clear stream can still carry things you cannot see, and a visibly muddy one may be the only practical option. You do what travellers have always done when choices are limited. You make the best decision available. Sometimes water is boiled for cooking or hot drinks, which can reduce biological risk, though emigrants were not sterilising every cup according to a modern public health routine. Sometimes muddy water may be allowed to settle before use. Sometimes you simply drink what the landscape provides because the alternative is not drinking. The trail rarely offers perfect options, only workable ones. Then comes quantity. Your family needs water for drinking, cooking, and perhaps limited washing. The animals may need far more. This makes a tiny spring that seems perfectly adequate for people much less impressive when dozens or hundreds of animals arrive. A wagon train can overwhelm a small source. The first animals disturb the water. More follow. Mud thickens around the bank. Hooves churn the edge. Containers have to be filled while animals crowd nearby. This is not the peaceful little pioneer scene painted on a biscuit tin. It is logistics with mud. And once everyone has drunk, you must think ahead. How far is the next dependable source? Do you fill every container now? Is there a dry stretch coming? Will today's heat increase consumption? Can the animals reach the next water before dark? A mistake here does not have to become fatal to be serious. Thirst weakens animals. Weak animals slow the wagon. A slower wagon spends longer between supply points. That consumes more food, and there it is again, one survival system leaning directly on another. Water affects travel speed. Travel speed affects provisions. Provisions affect weight. Weight affects animals. Animals determine whether the wagon moves. Nothing operates alone. This becomes especially obvious on dry sections of the route. When reliable water is far apart, travellers may carry extra water in barrels, kegs, buckets, or other containers. But water is heavy. A large reserve that protects you against thirst also increases the load on the team. You cannot solve every water problem merely by bringing more water. The solution is usually a combination of knowledge, timing, containers, careful use, and choosing the route intelligently. That makes local information valuable. A traveller who can tell you that the next creek has gone dry may be more useful at that moment than almost anything in your wagon. So are landmarks and distances, not because pioneers are trying to collect scenic memories, but because practical geography tells them how long their current resources must last. You begin to measure the day differently, not just in miles, in drinks, one creek to another, one river valley to the next, one safe camp to another. And water can interrupt movement in the opposite way too. Too little stops you. Too much also stops you. A swollen river is not a convenient water source with extra enthusiasm. It is a barrier. Heavy rain can raise crossings, deepen channels, strengthen currents, and turn an ordinary ford into something dangerous. Suddenly, the same water you spent hours trying to reach becomes something you may have to wait beside for a day or more. And while you wait, the family eats, the animals graze, the calendar advances. You are learning the unpleasant mathematics of overland travel. A delay is never only a delay. It has a cost in food, energy, weather exposure, and time remaining before winter. But for now, you are beside a smaller creek. Someone fills a kettle. Someone checks the animals. Mud clings to your boots. The water is not especially beautiful. That is fine. Beauty is not the requirement. Availability is. You drink. The oxen drink. Containers are filled. The next distance is discussed. Then the wagon rolls forward again. Behind you, the creek becomes just another line crossed on the journey. Ahead, there will be another. and another. For thousands of miles, the family survives not by carrying everything it needs, but by repeatedly reaching the next place where the landscape provides what the wagon cannot. Tonight, however, reaching water has only sold half the evening. You still have to turn your remaining food into a meal, and that means finding fuel, unpacking cookware, protecting provisions, and trying to cook dinner after a day in which everyone is already tired. The kitchen, such as it is waiting beside the wagon. By evening, the wagon has stopped. That does not mean the work has. The oxen need to be unyoked, water has to be found, bedding must be arranged, someone checks the wagon, someone gathers fuel, someone else begins thinking about food. And now you discover another useful truth about the Oregon Trail. A meal is not just food. It is fuel, water, cookware, time, weather, labour, and whatever patience remains after a long day of walking. You begin with fire. In wooded country, this may be straightforward enough. Fallen branches, small pieces of timber, brush, perhaps wood cut nearby. On open plains, the situation changes. Trees become scarce, the horizon stretches out beautifully, which is less impressive when you are trying to boil beans. Emigrants adapted. One of the best-known substitutes was dried buffalo dung, often called buffalo chips. To modern ears, this sounds like something added to the story for comic effect. It was not. Dry dung could burn. That made it useful. You gather it from the prairie, carry it back to camp, and stack it near the fire. Once dry, it produces enough heat for basic cooking. It may burn quickly compared with good wood, and managing the flame can take attention, but the essential question has already been answered. Can it heat supper? Yes. Good enough. This is the practical logic that follows you west. Things are valuable because they work. Now someone brings out a cooking pot. Cast iron is durable, useful, and heavy. Tinware is lighter. Families carried different combinations of kettles, frying pans, coffee pots, cups, plates, knives, and utensils, depending on what they owned and what they believed they needed. Again, there is no universal trail kitchen. But there is almost always compromise. You want equipment sturdy enough to survive months of use. You also want the animals to keep pulling it. So cooking stays simple. Flour can become bread or biscuits. Cornmeal can become a basic porridge or bread. Beans can be boiled. Salted pork or bacon can be fried. Rice can be cooked. Coffee can be made. If fresh meat is available, it may be added to the meal. The result depends on supplies, region, luck, money, and how much energy anyone has left. Dinner does not need to be elegant. It needs to happen, and this is where water returns to the story. Beans require it. Coffee requires it. Bread dough may require it. Pots need some form of cleaning. People need to drink. The little water source that looked adequate when you arrived now supports several jobs at once. If the water is muddy, everything becomes less pleasant. If it is far from the campsite, someone has to carry it. If the creek is low, animals and people may be competing for access. Nothing about a simple meal remains simple for long. Then there is time. Suppose you want beans. Dry beans travel well. They are compact. They contain useful nutrition. They are excellent trail food in principle. They are also not famous for cooking quickly. Soaking can help. Long boiling helps. Both require planning, fuel, and time. This means the best preserved food is not always the easiest food to prepare after 12 or 15 miles on the trail. You begin to understand why quick breads and fried foods could be useful. Flour mixed with available liquid and cooked into a simple bread can provide calories without an elaborate kitchen. Bacon is preserved and relatively quick to fry. Coffee is familiar, warming, and culturally important for many travelers. The menu may be repetitive. That is not a failure of imagination. It is the result of the system. Food that travels well tends to be dry, salted, preserved, or simple. Food that cooks easily saves fuel and labour. Food that is familiar requires less thought. Every one of those advantages matters after a difficult day. Weather can still interfere. Wind blows smoke into your face. Rain makes fuel harder to light. A sudden shower sends people scrambling to cover supplies. Cold means everyone wants hot food more urgently, while your fingers become less cooperative. Heat creates the opposite problem. After hours in the sun, the person cooking may have little interest in standing beside another source of heat. Dust finds everything. Bread, coffee, blankets, hair, probably your personality. A little. The wagon cover helps protect the main load, but camp life remains exposed. Food can absorb moisture. Containers can leak. Salted meat can deteriorate if stored badly. Flour can become damp. Anything open can attract insects or animals. So the evening routine includes maintenance. Close the sack. Cover the food. Keep it away from wet ground. Do not leave grease where an animal can reach it. Check what must be used first. A household on the trail is continuously preventing small losses. One spoilt sack may represent days of meals. A cracked container may lose valuable food. A kettle damaged beyond use creates another problem, because now even the food you still possess may become harder to cook. This is why apparently ordinary objects carry so much weight in a survival story. The frying pan matters. The coffee pot matters. The flour sack matters. The lid matters. A dry match, where matches are being used, matters. A usable fire matters. None of these things appears very heroic. That is becoming a pattern. You sit near the fire while something cooks. Around you, other families are doing much the same. Smoke rises from scattered camps. Animals graze or rest nearby. People talk quietly. Children may be eating before adults have finished their own work. The wagon that seems so full in Missouri has opened itself into a temporary household. Bedding comes out. Cookware comes out. Food comes out. Tools may come out. Then, before departure in the morning, most of it has to go back in again. This unpacking and repacking happens repeatedly, day after day. The road is not merely a journey. It is a house being assembled and dismantled every 24 hours, and cooking sits at the centre of that rhythm. Morning fire, evening fire, food measured out, water fetched, fuel gathered, dishes handled, supplies checked. If the day went well, the routine feels almost ordinary. If the day went badly, the same routine must happen anyway. A broken wagon does not cancel hunger. A sick child does not stop everyone else needing food. A river delay does not place the household on pause. The body keeps demanding calories. That is the relentless part. Now imagine that the wagon train has been moving for weeks. The food tastes familiar because you have eaten versions of it again and again. The bacon supply is smaller. The flour sacks are softer around the edges because there is less inside them. The coffee is watched a little more carefully. You are no longer cooking from abundance. You are cooking from calculation. How much do we use tonight? What can wait? What must be replaced at the next trading post? How far away is that? Is hunting worth the time? Can we afford what merchants are charging? The kitchen has become a measuring device. You can see the condition of the journey in the pantry. A full sack says the road behind you was expensive in weight. An empty one says the road ahead may be expensive in hunger. And as the miles accumulate, families sometimes begin reducing portions, stretching staples, buying what they can, trading, hunting, or simply accepting less variety. The meals become a warning before the stomach becomes an emergency. That is where we are heading next. Not starvation in some dramatic instant. Something quieter. A supply shrinking one breakfast at a time. Food rarely disappears all at once. It thins. That is the part you notice first. A sack that once took 2 hands to shift can now be lifted easily. The bacon slab has become a narrow strip wrapped carefully against the heat. The coffee tin is no longer opened casually. Someone shakes the flour bag before supper and listens for how much remains. Nothing is empty yet. But now every meal becomes a prediction. How many days are left before the next place where supplies might be bought? How many people are eating from the wagon? Has the train been moving at the pace you expected? Has rain slowed you? Has a river held you? Has an ox gone lame? The trail has a habit of turning food arithmetic into travel arithmetic. If your wagon moves slowly, your family still eats. If you stop for repairs, your family still eats. If someone becomes sick and the train waits, your family still eats. Distance matters, but time is what consumes provisions. That is why shortage can begin while the wagon still appears reasonably well supplied. You start trimming. A little less bacon in the pan, a smaller scoop of flour, coffee made weaker or less often, sugar saved, beans appearing more frequently because they remain. The changes are not dramatic enough to announce around the campfire. They are practical, and perhaps a little depressing. A family that packed for several months could not know exactly how each month would unfold. Guidebooks, merchants, and experienced travellers offered estimates, but weather, illness, breakdowns, bad roads, and lost livestock did not read the guidebook. So provisions that look sensible in Missouri could look very different hundreds of miles later. This is where resupply becomes important. Trading posts, forts, settlements, and other points along the route could sell flour, bacon, coffee, sugar, and other goods. Their existence made the journey more manageable. But they did not turn the trail into a row of convenient grocery stores. Stock varied. Prices varied. Demand varied. A place that had plenty for one group might have less when another group arrived later. And anything sold far from major supply centres had already travelled a difficult route of its own. You might reach a fort relieved to see food for sale and then discover that relief has a price attached to it. If you have money, you buy what you can justify. If you do not, the problem becomes sharper. Families could trade or rely on help from others, but none of it was guaranteed. The safest provisions were still those already inside your wagon. Unfortunately, those were becoming lighter. So people looked to the landscape. Hunting is the obvious answer in popular memory. There are deer, antelope, buffalo on parts of the plains. Surely, then, a family short of meat simply takes a rifle, walks out, and returns with supper. Sometimes that happened. It was never that simple. First, you need game to be present. Then someone has to find it. Then get close enough. Then shoot accurately. Ammunition is limited too. Time spent hunting is time not spent moving, repairing equipment, or handling camp work. And if the hunt succeeds spectacularly, the problem changes again. You now have more fresh meat than a family can eat before it spoils. Preservation requires labour. Meat can be dried, smoked where conditions allow, or shared, but warm weather does not grant unlimited time. A buffalo is not a conveniently packaged bacon replacement. It is a very large animal that immediately becomes work. This is one reason the staples in the wagon remain so important even where hunting is possible. Flour does not run away. Beans do not require marksmanship. Salted pork has already been preserved. Dull food is dependable food. Mostly, there is another problem with relying too heavily on wild game. Large numbers of emigrants travelled the same broad corridor, hunting and stopping near many of the same rivers and camps. The landscape was not an untouched pantry waiting for each new wagon train. Availability changed along the route and through the season, so hunting could supplement supplies, sometimes substantially, but it was a poor substitute for planning. You can see the difference at supper. If the hunt failed, the flour bag still matters. If the flour bag failed, the hunt suddenly matters much more. That is not a comfortable reversal. Families also bought food from people living along or near the trail when opportunities existed. Native communities, settlers, traders, and others could sell or exchange fresh produce, livestock products, or other provisions depending on place and circumstance. Again, this varied enormously. There was no single experience repeated across 2,000 miles. Some encounters were commercial or cooperative, others were tense or violent. But for an emigrant household thinking mainly about tomorrow's meal, local exchange could mean something very concrete. Fresh food, a replacement for something spoiled, a few days of breathing room. And breathing room matters because hunger does not have to mean immediate starvation. The more common pressure begins earlier. Weakness, irritability, less energy for walking, less patience for repair work. A child asking for more food when the adults are already calculating portions. A tired person facing another steep grade on fewer calories. Now the human body enters the mechanism. A wagon can be lightened. A person cannot be expected to work indefinitely on less and less food without consequence. Many emigrants walked substantial distances beside the wagons. Camp work followed. Animals needed care. Water had to be carried. Fuel gathered. Meals prepared. Clothes and bedding managed. Repairs made. Calories were not merely comfort. They were part of the transport system. A hungry family works less efficiently. A weak driver handles animals less effectively. A tired person may make poorer decisions. The line between food and movement becomes even tighter. So rationing has limits. Reducing waste is sensible. Stretching provisions can be necessary, but simply eating less cannot solve an indefinitely long delay. At some point, the only real solutions are more food or faster progress. And faster progress is not always yours to choose. Imagine the wagon stopped beside a damaged wheel. The repair takes a day. That evening, the following morning, everyone eats again. You have travelled almost nowhere. 2 meals have disappeared. The wheel is now fixed, but your food supply has moved west without you. Not ideal. This is why delays early in the journey can create anxiety far later. Each lost day nudges the family closer to colder weather in the mountains. Each extra meal reduces what remains for that colder weather. The Oregon Trail's threats begin linking together. A river crossing delays you. The delay consumes food. Lower provisions force rationing or resupply. Resupply costs money or time. Lost time pushes you later into the season. Later travel raises the chance of cold, and cold increases the need for food, shelter, dry clothing, healthy animals, and a wagon that still works. One problem rarely stays politely in its own category. For now, though, the family is still eating. You scrape the last bit of fat from the pan. The bread is smaller than it was a month ago. Someone mentions the next fort. Someone else calculates the distance. Tomorrow, perhaps, there will be game. Perhaps there will be supplies for sale. Perhaps the road will be kind. But there is another source of food walking beside the wagon that must never become food unless the situation is desperate. The oxen. They are not simply animals in the scenery. They are the engine carrying everything you still possess. And keeping them alive will soon prove just as important as keeping the flour sacks full. By now, the oxen have stopped looking like background scenery. They are the journey. Every sack of flour, every blanket, every tool, every cooking pot, every child too tired to walk, and every possession you still insist on carrying depends on animals that must wake up tomorrow and keep pulling. That makes the ox team one of the most important survival systems on the trail. Oxen were common because they offered a useful combination of strength, endurance, steadiness, and relative economy. They could live largely on grass found along the route, and they were generally less dependent on expensive grain than horses. They were not fast. The Oregon Trail was not a race in the modern sense. It was a long argument, with distance. A steady animal that could keep working day after day was often more valuable than one that could move quickly for a shorter period. You begin to notice their routine. In the morning, the animals must be gathered. Yokes are fitted. Chains or other connections are checked. The load is examined. Then the team leans forward. The wagon moves. Slowly. This rhythm repeats for months. Grass matters. As fuel, a wagon train needs enough forage for large numbers of animals. Good grazing means the oxen can recover overnight. Poor grazing means they begin the next day with less strength. Now imagine several wagon trains using the same stretch of route. The first animals graze, then more arrive, then more. Grass near popular camps and water sources can be cropped down heavily. You cannot ask the team to eat optimism. If grazing is poor, people may have to move farther to find better forage, adjust camps, or accept weaker animals. And weak animals create a cascade. They pull more slowly. Slow travel increases the time spent on the trail. More time consumes more food. More days expose the family to more weather. The calendar keeps moving toward autumn. Once again, one problem becomes several. Water matters just as much. After hours of pulling, oxen need to drink. A route with good grass but inadequate water is not good enough. This is one reason the broad overland corridors often followed rivers and valleys where both could be found. People are reading the landscape partly through the needs of livestock. Is there water? Is there grass? Is the ground firm? Can the animals handle the grade? That last question becomes increasingly important as the country changes. On relatively open plains, a wagon may roll steadily. Then the ground rises. Mud deepens. A bank becomes steep. A rocky stretch shakes the wagon. Now every unnecessary pound inside begins to announce itself again. The team leans harder into the yoke. The wheels resist. People may get out and walk. They may push. They may double-team wagons for difficult climbs, using additional animals where circumstances allow. And suddenly the furniture abandoned beside the trail makes even more sense. The road does not care that the bureau belonged to your grandmother. The oxen care only about weight. There are limits to what muscle can solve. An animal can become lame. A hoof can become injured. Shoulders and necks can suffer from poor equipment or hard use. Illness can weaken a team. An ox can wander off. It can die. And when one animal fails, you do not merely lose livestock. You lose pulling power. That is a very different kind of loss. A cracked cup is inconvenient. A dead ox may stop the wagon. Families therefore watch their teams carefully. Harnessing or yoking equipment needs to fit and remain usable. Animals need time to graze. Exhausted teams may require rest. Drivers must balance daily progress against the risk of pushing too hard. Too slow, and you lose time. Too hard, and you may lose the animals that make progress possible at all. There is no perfect answer. You are managing exhaustion. This is one reason the daily mileage of an emigrant wagon train can feel surprisingly modest to someone accustomed to cars. You are not measuring what a person can cover on a good road. You are measuring what a loaded wagon, pulled by living animals, can survive repeatedly, day after day, week after week. The goal is not to achieve one impressive distance. The goal is to still have a functioning team several hundred miles later. That changes what fast means. A family that pushes too hard early may pay for it later in weakened animals. A family that moves too cautiously may lose precious seasonal time. Good travel sits somewhere between impatience and breakdown. Mostly, there are moments when circumstances choose for you. Deep mud can exhaust animals rapidly. A steep riverbank may require extra effort. A difficult crossing may leave them wet, shaken, or injured. Heat can increase thirst. Cold rain can drain everyone. Even insects can become a serious nuisance for livestock in some places. The oxen cannot explain any of this. They simply slow down. That slowing is information. You learn to read it. A strong team keeps the wagon moving with a familiar rhythm. A struggling team stretches the line. People walk closer. Someone looks at the load. Perhaps something can be removed. Perhaps the animals need rest. Perhaps the wagon must wait. And waiting means the same thing it always means. Another meal. Another day. Another small step toward colder weather ahead. The oxen also shape where you sleep. At camp, they need access to grazing, and travellers must prevent them from wandering too far. Animals might be guarded, herded, tethered, or otherwise managed according to conditions and practice. This is work after the day's travel has already ended. Someone who has walked for hours may still need to deal with livestock before supper. In the morning, the animals must be found and prepared again before departure. A missing ox at dawn can hold everyone up. You can almost hear the conversation. Where is it? Who saw it last? How far did it wander? Not exactly the heroic westward expansion usually painted on a wall, but very real. Livestock also represent money. A family has invested heavily in the animals needed to move west. Replacing them along the way can be difficult and expensive. If animals become too weak, the family may have to reduce the load, buy or trade for replacements, combine resources with others, or alter plans. That is why discarded possessions beside the road tell only half the story. They are not simply evidence that emigrants packed badly. Sometimes they are evidence that the transportation system was failing and people were trying to save it. You throw away the chair because the ox matters more. Then perhaps the chest. Then tools you thought you needed. Then books. The wagon grows lighter. The household becomes smaller. Survival begins editing your possessions. And every object left behind is a choice in favor of movement. By evening, the team finally stops. The yokes come off. The animals lower their heads toward grass or water. For a few hours, they are no longer engines. They are simply tired animals eating in the fading light. Tomorrow, you will ask them to pull again. And again. Until Oregon, or until something breaks first. Because even with healthy oxen, the load still has to travel through wheels, axles, tongues, hubs, and wooden joints that have been rattling over rough ground for hundreds of miles. Eventually, one of those pieces is going to complain. Sometimes with a squeak, sometimes with a crack, and when the wagon itself fails, the entire moving household stops with it. The sound is small at first. A squeak, then another. You hear it from somewhere beneath the wagon, regular as a metronome. Every turn of the wheel produces the same complaint. That is enough to make someone stop walking. Because by now, you know that wagons rarely fail all at once without warning. They loosen, rub, crack, wear, shift. A small sound can become a broken part, and a broken part can turn a moving household into a stationary one. So the wagon stops. Again, everyone gathers around the problem. The first thing to understand is that your wagon is not a solid object. It is a collection of parts being shaken thousands of times every day. Wheels, hubs, spokes, rims, axles, the tongue reaching forward toward the team. Iron fittings, pins, bolts, wooden joints, the wagon box itself, then the canvas cover and the bows holding it above the load. Every one of those parts lives in dust, mud, water, heat, cold, and vibration. Nothing gets an easy life. Take the wheel. It looks simple from a distance. Round, wooden, sensible. Up close, it is a carefully built structure. Spokes carry force between the hub and the outer rim. The rim is made from shaped wooden sections, often held together and strengthened by an iron tyre around the outside. That iron tyre is useful because the wheel is constantly striking hard ground. But wood changes. It dries. It swells. It shrinks. It cracks. And after hundreds of miles, the fit between wood and iron may no longer be as tidy as it was when you left Missouri. A loose tyre can become a serious problem. Travellers and wagon makers had ways of dealing with such things. But the larger lesson is simpler. Wagon maintenance is not optional. You cannot merely load the wagon once and forget about it until Oregon. You listen, you inspect, you tighten, you grease, you repair, then you listen again. Axles demand particular attention because the wheels rotate around them under heavy load. Friction produces heat and wear. Grease helps reduce that friction. This means wagon grease is not a decorative extra tucked beneath the flour. It is part of the machine. If lubrication is neglected, a hub and axle can heat, wear, and damage one another. Travellers might carry grease and stop periodically to attend to the wheels. The work is dirty. You crouch near the wagon, hands blackened with grease and dust. The wheel may need to be raised or removed, checked, and fitted again. You have travelled 0 miles while doing this, but that is still faster than destroying the axle. Then there are roads. Calling them roads can be generous. Much of the overland route is a trail worn by previous traffic rather than a smooth, engineered surface. Ruts form. Rain turns soil to mud. Dry stretches become hard and uneven. Rocks strike the wheels. Steep banks force wagons into awkward angles. Each shock passes through the vehicle. You feel it in shifting cookware, rubbing sacks, and, most importantly, in the wooden frame carrying all of it. This is why packing matters again. A badly balanced load stresses the wagon. Too much weight stresses everything. A heavy wagon sinking into soft ground puts more strain on the animals and on the vehicle itself. So the family survival equation returns to the same annoying answer. Bring what you need, but not too much. Suppose the crack you heard is more serious. Perhaps a spoke has broken. Perhaps part of the tongue or another wooden component has split. Perhaps an axle has failed. Now improvisation begins. Families carried tools because the wagon had to function far from a professional workshop. An axe is useful for more than cutting firewood. A saw can shape replacement wood. A hammer, nails, rope, chains, spare bolts, and assorted repair materials may keep a damaged wagon moving long enough to reach better help. Not every emigrant is a skilled wheelwright. Some repairs can be made beside the trail. Others require better tools and experience. Blacksmiths, wagon repairers, trading posts, forts, and settlements along parts of the route could provide help. But they may be miles away. So the first question is often not, can we make this perfect? It is, can we make this move? That is a very Oregon Trail question. Temporary repairs do not need to look elegant. A cracked wooden member can sometimes be reinforced. A damaged part may be bound, braced, replaced, or improvised from available material. If a wagon is too badly damaged, the load may have to be shifted. Possessions may be transferred to another vehicle. Goods may be abandoned. People may combine resources. The family that began the journey as one independent household becomes increasingly dependent on the skills and equipment around it. Someone in another wagon may own the tool you need. Someone may know how to shape a piece of wood properly. Someone may have spare hardware. Someone may simply provide extra hands to lift the wagon. That cooperation can be more valuable than anything written in a guidebook. Now imagine the hardest failure. An axle breaks. The wagon drops awkwardly. One wheel no longer sits where it should. The team stops, but the damage has already happened. An axle is not a small convenience part. It carries the wagon's load and keeps the wheels aligned. If it cannot do that, you are not going anywhere in the normal sense. So the load comes out. Food sacks are lifted onto the ground. Blankets, tools, cookware, boxes. Everything you worked so carefully to pack in Missouri now sits beside the trail while adults examine a piece of wood or metal that has suddenly become more important than nearly all of it. This is the strange hierarchy of survival. Yesterday, the flour mattered most. Today, the axle does. Tomorrow, perhaps, water will. The most important thing keeps changing. Repairs consume time. Time consumes food. And if the wagon train waits with you, your problem now costs other families time as well. Sometimes they wait. Sometimes only a few people stay behind. Sometimes help is arranged farther ahead. The exact response depends on the damage, the group, the location, the season, and how much delay can be tolerated. That last part becomes increasingly important. Early in the journey, losing half a day is irritating. Late in the season, half a day has more weight. The mountains do not move farther away because your wheel broke. Autumn does not agree to arrive later. So mechanical reliability becomes connected to weather. A wagon repaired quickly protects the calendar. A wagon that repeatedly fails steals days. This is why maintenance is survival, even when nobody is hungry, cold, or sick. The danger is not only the broken object, it is what the broken object delays. You finally get the wheel back into place. The wagon lowers. Someone gives it a push. It turns, not beautifully, but enough. That helps. The load is packed again. The oxen are brought forward. The family starts walking. For a while, everyone listens to the wagon. No crack, no grinding, only the usual creak of wood and the slow turning of wheels. After several miles, the sound becomes ordinary again, until the trail puts something larger in front of you. A river. And unlike a broken wheel, a river cannot be repaired. You have to cross it. With the wagon, with the food, with the animals, with the children, and preferably with all of those things still belonging to you when you reach the opposite bank. The river looks wider when everything you own has to cross it. From the bank, you can see the current moving past. The opposite side may not even be very far away. That is almost beside the point. Between here and there are animals, children, flour, blankets, tools, cookware, spare clothing, and a wagon that has already spent hundreds of miles trying not to fall apart. Now all of it has to enter water. A river crossing can be routine. It can also consume hours, damage equipment, drown livestock, soak provisions, or stop a wagon train completely. The first decision is whether you should cross at all. You look at depth, current, the condition of the riverbed, the slope of the banks, weather, perhaps the experience of people who crossed earlier. A ford that worked yesterday may be different after heavy rain upstream. A shallow-looking stretch can hide holes, soft mud, or a stronger current than expected. So someone investigates. People may wade out where conditions allow, test the bottom, watch how animals behave, or ask others nearby what they know. This is practical intelligence, not bravery. You do not receive extra points for entering a dangerous river confidently. If the crossing is too difficult, waiting may be the better choice. Unfortunately, waiting has its usual price. Food, time, grass for the animals. Another day removed from the shrinking season, so even standing still is a decision. At some crossings, emigrants used ferries. A ferry could save enormous effort, particularly where the river was deep or dangerous. Wagons, people, and sometimes livestock could be carried across in stages. But ferries cost money. They could also have queues. Imagine arriving after several wagon trains have already done the same calculation. Now your family is camped beside the river, watching someone else's wagon make the crossing, while the flour supply continues becoming lighter. Still, paying a ferryman can look very reasonable compared with losing the wagon. Where no convenient ferry is available, the wagon itself may have to ford or, under some circumstances, be prepared to float. That sounds improbable until you remember what a covered wagon is. It is a wooden box. Wood floats. Mostly. The problem is that the wagon was designed to roll over land, not become a boat. To float one, emigrants could remove wheels or secure parts, seal the wagon box as well as possible, and guide it across with ropes or other assistance depending on local conditions and the vehicle. Other crossings were simply driven or pulled through shallow water. Each method produces different problems. Consider a ford first. The animals enter. Water rises around their legs. The wagon follows. The wheels disappear beneath the surface. The current pushes sideways against the box. Inside are supplies that strongly prefer not to become wet. The flour in particular has no interest in adventure. If water gets into the load, food can be ruined. Bedding can become soaked. Clothing can become useless when you need it most. Wooden containers swell. Loose objects shift. So before a crossing, families may raise or protect vulnerable goods as well as circumstances permit. Packing becomes waterproofing. The same blanket that was simply bedding yesterday is now cargo that must remain dry. Then there are the animals. Oxen can cross water, but current, depth, footing and panic matter. A team that loses its footing can place the wagon in danger very quickly. Animals can become tangled. A wagon can tip. A wheel can strike a submerged obstacle. The riverbank on the far side may be steep enough to create another problem after the water itself has been crossed. You reach the opposite edge. Now the team has to pull a wet, heavy wagon upward. Sometimes extra animals or people are needed. Ropes may help. Everyone who can work has a job. Push. Pull. Guide. Hold. Keep the load from shifting. Try not to stand where a wheel will make your day memorable for the wrong reason. Eventually, the wagon climbs onto firm ground. You stop. The crossing is technically complete. Now you inspect the damage. Is anything wet? Did a container open? Did the wagon take on water? Are the animals injured? Did a wheel loosen? River crossings have a way of combining several of your existing problems at once. Water threatens food. Water stresses animals. Water stresses the wagon. Water delays travel. And cold water can leave people chilled, especially when clothing and bedding become soaked. One river can therefore reach forward into the next night. Suppose your blankets are wet. The temperature falls after sunset. Now a crossing that seemed successful at midday has become a cold weather problem. You need a fire. You need fuel. You need time to dry things. Perhaps the day's travel ends early. That means fewer miles. Fewer miles mean another day added somewhere later. Again, the trail keeps sending bills forward. The larger rivers are even more intimidating. The Platte, Snake, Columbia, and numerous tributaries presented different conditions along different portions of the migration routes. There was no single technique that solved every crossing. Some rivers were broad and relatively shallow. Some were swift. Some had established ferries. Some required careful timing. Local geography dictated the answer. That matters because the familiar image of the Oregon Trail as one continuous dirt track hides what emigrants actually experienced. The trail was a sequence of changing systems. Prairie, river valley, ford, steep bank, dry stretch, mountain pass, mud, rock. Each environment demands something different from the same wagon. And rivers are where the illusion of control becomes especially thin. You can repair a wheel. You can ration flour. You can rest an ox. But you cannot tighten the river with a wrench. You have to work with whatever condition it presents. Sometimes the wisest action is simply to wait. Water levels may fall. Weather may improve. A ferry may become available. Another group may cross first and show you where the safe line lies. Patience can be a survival tool. It does not feel heroic either. Mostly, it feels like sitting beside a river while children ask when you are leaving. Eventually, the team enters. The wagon follows. For several minutes, everything becomes noise. Water against wood. People calling instructions. Animals straining, ropes tightening, wheels grinding across stones beneath the surface. Then the front wheels rise, the rear wheels follow. The wagon reaches dry ground. Someone laughs quietly. Someone checks the flour. Still dry. That may be the best news of the day. You repack what shifted. The animals breathe. The river keeps moving as though none of this mattered. Tomorrow it will be behind you. But the crossing has cost hours, perhaps a day, perhaps more. And every lost hour pushes the journey a little farther into the year. So when the air begins to cool and the mornings start feeling sharper, you understand that weather is no longer merely something happening around the wagon. It is becoming a deadline. The first cold morning is easy to dismiss. You wake beneath blankets and notice your breath hanging faintly in the air. The grass is wet. The wagon cover feels cold to the touch. Someone complains while pulling on stiff boots. By midday, the sun may be warm again, so perhaps it means nothing. Then another morning comes. And another. Soon the cold is no longer a brief inconvenience before breakfast. It is a reminder that the calendar has been moving west with you. Weather on the Oregon Trail did not behave politely. Families crossed regions with very different elevations, temperatures, winds, and rainfall. A day could begin chilly and become hot. A warm stretch could be followed by cold rain. Higher country could bring frost while lower country still felt like summer. The farther west you travel, the less useful one simple idea of the weather becomes. You are crossing climates. That makes clothing important in a very practical way. You need garments that can handle heat during the day and cold later on. Layering helps, even if no one on the trail uses that modern outdoor term. A shirt, perhaps a vest, a coat or heavier outer garment when needed. Women's clothing may include multiple layers of undergarments, dresses, aprons, shawls, bonnets, or heavier wraps depending on means, custom, and conditions. Children need protection too. Everyone's exact clothing varies, but the mechanism is the same. You cannot predict one temperature and dress for it. You have to adjust. That sounds easy until everything you own is packed in a wagon. The coat you need tonight may be beneath cookware and sacks. The blanket you want may have become damp. A sudden rainstorm may soak the people who were walking beside the wagon before anyone can protect themselves properly. Then cold changes from an air temperature into a body problem. Wet clothing removes heat quickly. Wind makes that worse. A cold night after a wet day can become miserable even when the thermometer, if you happen to have one, would not look extreme by modern standards. The body does not care whether the number sounds dramatic. It cares whether you can get dry. So rain protection matters. The wagon's canvas cover helps shield supplies and may offer shelter in bad weather, though it is not a sealed modern camper. Families could use tents as well, and sleeping arrangements varied enormously. Some people slept beneath or near the wagon. Some used tents. Some slept inside wagons when space and circumstances allowed. Often, the wagon was so full of goods that treating it as a bedroom for the entire family was impractical. That familiar image of everyone sleeping comfortably beneath the white canvas is too tidy. The wagon is primarily carrying your survival equipment. At night, the household spreads outward. Blankets on the ground, bedrolls, perhaps a tent, children placed where adults can keep track of them, cooking equipment nearby, animals beyond that. The whole camp becomes a temporary village that disappears again in the morning. And the ground has opinions. Dry ground is tolerable. Wet ground pulls heat from the body and soaks bedding. Mud makes everything heavier. A low campsite can collect water after rain. A pleasant evening spot can become a shallow pond before dawn. So choosing where to stop is another quiet survival decision. You want water nearby. You want grass for the animals. You want fuel if possible. You also want ground that will not become miserable if the weather changes. Those needs do not always arrive in the same convenient location. You choose the best compromise. Again, wind is another companion. On open plains, it can blow for hours. It pushes dust through clothing. It makes cooking harder. It snaps canvas. It cools wet skin. At night, it can turn a merely cold camp into something much less comfortable. The wagon itself may serve as a partial windbreak depending on how the camp is arranged. Tents and bedding have to be secured. Loose items disappear surprisingly quickly when the prairie decides they belong elsewhere. Not ideal. Then comes heat. It is easy to focus on cold because snow makes better stories. Heat creates its own problems. People walking beside wagons can spend hours exposed to sun. Animals become thirsty. Water sources matter more. Food spoils faster. Dust rises. Contrast. Sleep can be uncomfortable. A heavy coat is useless now, but you still have to carry it because eventually you will need it again. That is one of the strange things about overland travel. The wagon must carry solutions for conditions that are not currently happening. Blankets in heat. Heavy clothing during warm weather. Repair materials while nothing is broken. Extra food while everyone is full. You haul future problems with you. And because every solution weighs something, preparation always competes with mobility. Storms can rearrange the day quickly. Rain turns dusty track into mud. Mud increases rolling resistance. The animals work harder. Wheels sink. Daily mileage falls. Someone may have to walk in worse conditions than usual. Clothing becomes wet. The evening fire becomes harder to start. You lose miles and spend more energy at the same time. That is a poor exchange. Thunderstorms also bring lightning, wind, and sudden heavy rain. On exposed plains, there may be little shelter in the modern sense. You have the wagon, perhaps a tent, perhaps a nearby rise or depression, though choosing safe ground around storms and flooding is not simple. Mostly, you endure. And this is where weather begins connecting directly to the title of the journey. Cold is survivable when you have dry bedding, enough food, healthy animals, workable shelter, and time. Cold becomes more dangerous when those systems are already failing. If the flour is running low, people have fewer calories. If the oxen are weak, travel slows. If a river has delayed you, the season is later. If the wagon cover leaks, bedding becomes wet. If someone is sick, they cope with cold less effectively. Weather does not always create the weakness. Sometimes it simply finds it. That is why the arrival of cooler mornings can make experienced travellers nervous. They are not frightened by one chilly night. They are thinking ahead. How far are the mountains? How many miles remain? How quickly are we moving? Are the animals still strong? How much food is left? Is anything likely to delay us? The weather has turned into a clock. You see it in frost on grass. You feel it in the evening air. Perhaps ice appears in a shallow container one morning. Perhaps distant peaks show snow. These are not simply beautiful signs of autumn. They are information. You need to keep moving. That changes the mood of delay. A broken wheel in spring was frustrating. The same failure much later can feel dangerous. A day waiting beside a river in early summer was expensive. A day lost when snow is beginning to reach mountain country may matter much more. The journey has always been a race against winter. You simply feel the race more clearly now. That evening, you pull another blanket around yourself. The fire burns low. The wagon stands dark beside you. Tomorrow's clothing is placed where it can be reached. Someone checks the sky. Someone mentions the pass ahead. You lie down, knowing that staying warm tonight is manageable. The harder question is how many cold nights still lie between you and Oregon, and whether the wagon train can reach the high country before those cold nights become snow. Cold changes the meaning of distance. Earlier in the journey, another 100 miles was simply another 100 miles. Now it is another 100 miles before snow. Another 100 miles before mountain passes become harder. Another 100 miles in which an ox can weaken, a wheel can break, a river can rise, or someone can become sick. The calendar has always been moving. Now you can feel it. That is why departure timing mattered so much on the Oregon Trail. Leave too early in spring, and you may encounter muddy roads, swollen streams, poor grazing, and cold weather before grass has grown well enough for large numbers of draft animals. Leave too late, and you may reach the mountains when autumn is already tightening around them. There is no perfect day, only a workable window. Families gathering near the Missouri frontier often waited for conditions to improve before beginning the long westward movement. Grass needed to be available for livestock. Rivers and roads had to become manageable. Yet every additional day spent waiting in the east also removed a day from the other end of the journey. It is a surprisingly delicate calculation. Start when the trail can support you. Finish before winter makes the trail far less forgiving. Between those 2 points lie roughly 2,000 miles of uncertainty. Now imagine you are several months into that calculation. The days are shorter. Morning starts more slowly. Blankets are harder to leave. Animals need to be found, watered, fed where possible, yoked and brought into position. Breakfast still has to happen. The wagon still needs checking. Then everyone starts walking. Daily mileage matters more than ever. A wagon train might commonly make something around a dozen to perhaps 15 miles in a day under reasonable conditions, sometimes more, sometimes considerably less. Terrain, weather, livestock, health, river crossings, and mechanical trouble could change the number dramatically. That may sound painfully slow. It is. You can walk farther than that yourself. The problem is that the entire moving household must arrive too. The loaded wagons, the oxen, the children, the sick, the spare animals, the people managing all of them, and you have to repeat the performance tomorrow. A single heroic 20-mile day is not especially helpful if exhausted livestock reduce the next 3 days to very little. Progress has to be sustainable, until suddenly it also has to be urgent. That tension becomes stronger late in the journey. Push too hard, and the animals may fail. Move too cautiously, and weather may reach the mountains before you do. So decisions become uncomfortable. Do you continue a little longer before making camp? Do you rest an animal that is beginning to struggle? Do you wait for a family whose wagon needs repair? Do you abandon something heavy and keep moving? Do you stop to hunt? Every answer costs something. This is where all the small delays you accumulated earlier begin returning to the story. Remember the river that held you for a day? It is here. The damaged wheel that consumed an afternoon? Here too. The missing ox at dawn? Still here. The rainy morning when mud reduced progress to a crawl? Also here. None of those events seemed decisive alone. Together they may have shifted your arrival west by days or weeks. The trail is keeping the total. A mountain country makes that total important. Routes used by Oregon-bound emigrants crossed high terrain in the Rocky Mountain region and later through other difficult landscapes farther west. The famous South Pass provided a comparatively broad and manageable crossing of the Continental Divide, which is one reason the overland route became practical for wagons. But manageable is not the same as easy. You are still travelling at elevation. Weather changes quickly. Nights can be cold. Later in the season, snow becomes more likely. Other sections farther west could present steep grades, difficult roads, and mountain crossings of their own. So reaching one major pass does not mean the weather problem has ended. You still have distance ahead. This is why people watch the sky differently now. Clouds are not merely clouds. A cold wind is not merely uncomfortable. Snow on nearby heights is information. You begin asking how much lower the snow may come. Perhaps nothing happens. Perhaps the storm passes. Perhaps morning brings clear blue air and a thin crust of frost. You pack and move. That helps. But suppose snow does fall. A light snowfall may be inconvenient rather than catastrophic. The trouble comes when snow accumulates, hides the trail, makes slopes slippery, covers grazing, or slows animals and wagons that were already near their limits. Grass is especially important. Your oxen cannot eat scenery. If snow covers forage deeply, the transportation system loses fuel. You may carry some feed under particular circumstances, but not enough to supply a large team indefinitely across a long journey. That is one reason severe winter conditions could become so dangerous. The wagon does not simply become cold. The system begins losing inputs. Less grazing weakens animals. Weak animals reduce progress. Reduced progress keeps you in the cold longer. Longer exposure consumes more provisions, and colder conditions may increase the energy people need just to remain warm and keep working. The loop turns against you. This is the opposite of what you want. You need movement to escape worsening conditions, while worsening conditions make movement harder. There is the contradiction. The closer winter comes, the faster you need to travel. The closer winter comes, the harder fast travel may become. So prevention matters much more than dramatic rescue. Leave at a sensible time. Protect the animals. Maintain the wagon. Do not waste days unnecessarily. Watch supplies. Use good information. Make steady progress while conditions allow it. The quiet, repetitive work of the previous months has been building toward this point. Survival is often less about responding brilliantly to catastrophe than about arriving before catastrophe becomes available. You can feel that in camp now. People speak about miles remaining, about routes, about weather ahead, perhaps about whether to take a cut-off or remain on a known road. Some shortcuts promised saved distance but could introduce their own difficulties. A shorter line on a map does not guarantee faster travel on the ground. Terrain decides, water decides, grass decides, wagons decide. Sometimes the safest route is the one whose problems are better understood. By late season, experiments become expensive. You wake one morning to frozen ground. The fire takes longer to feel useful. Someone has to shake frost from a blanket. The oxen stand quietly in the cold while yokes are fitted. Nobody needs a speech. Everyone understands. Move. The wagon starts. Wheels creak. People walk beside it with coats drawn tighter. By afternoon, the sun may soften the day again. You cover another 12 miles. Perhaps 14. Not spectacular, but west. That is enough. Then the next morning comes, and you do it again. The race is not fast. It is relentless. And just when the family needs every healthy body working, another threat begins to matter even more than cold. Illness, because a wagon train can repair wood, redistribute weight, and wait for a river. A sick person is much harder to fix. Illness changes the pace of a wagon train in a way a broken wheel does not. A wheel can be examined. A crack can be seen of it. A replacement part can sometimes be made. A sick person may simply wake weaker than yesterday, then weaker again tomorrow. No obvious repair presents itself. You are months from home, sleeping outdoors, drinking from uncertain water sources, sharing crowded camps, working hard every day, and relying on a medical system that cannot identify many diseases the way modern medicine can. That makes illness one of the most persistent threats on the trail. Not the dramatic dangers people tend to remember first. Not arrows. Not wild animals. Not spectacular falls from cliffs. Disease, quietly, repeatedly, and often without much warning. Cholera became especially feared on overland routes during epidemic years in the mid-19th century. It could spread rapidly through contaminated water or food, although emigrants at the time did not understand the bacterial cause in modern terms. To them, the experience could feel sudden and mysterious. One person is walking beside the wagon. Then comes severe diarrhea, vomiting, weakness, dehydration. The body can lose fluid with frightening speed. A person who seemed functional in the morning may be seriously ill by evening. That is terrifying on any journey. On the Oregon Trail, it happens beside a riverbank or camp with limited medical care, and the water you need most desperately may be part of the problem. This is one of the cruelest mechanisms on the trail. Large groups of people and livestock gather near the same water sources. They camp, they wash, they drink. Animals enter the water, waste may be left nearby. Then another wagon train arrives. A contaminated source can serve many people in succession. Travel concentrates human bodies along a narrow corridor. Disease benefits from concentration. The emigrants are moving west. So, in a sense, infection can move west with them. This does not mean every stream is dangerous or every traveller becomes sick. It means the structure of trail life creates repeated opportunities for disease transmission. And people cannot simply stop drinking water. There is no practical alternative. You take the water available. You may choose the cleaner-looking source. You may boil some for cooking or coffee. You may avoid obviously foul pools. But without modern germ theory, sanitation systems, filtration, or laboratory testing, many risks remain invisible. That word matters. Invisible. A broken axle announces itself. Contaminated water does not. Then there is dysentery and other gastrointestinal illness. Diarrhea sounds almost trivial in modern conversation. On the trail, repeated fluid loss can become serious, especially for children, older adults, or anyone already exhausted and poorly nourished. And treatment options are limited. 19th century medicine offers remedies, but many are ineffective, and some can make matters worse. People carry medicines they trust, perhaps opiates for pain or diarrhea, perhaps calomel, a mercury-containing preparation widely used in the period, perhaps herbal remedies, perhaps alcohol-based preparations, The medicine chest may look reassuring. Its contents do not guarantee recovery. That is an uncomfortable correction to the popular image of pioneer toughness. Strength does not kill bacteria. Determination does not replace water lost from severe diarrhea. You can be hard-working, brave, prepared, and still become desperately sick. Illness also disrupts the family machine. Remember how many tasks have to happen every day? Animals must be managed, food prepared, water carried, children watched, wagon parts checked, fuel gathered, camp packed. Someone drives or guides the team, others walk. If one adult becomes sick, the work does not disappear. It moves on to everyone else. Now the person cooking may also have to manage animals. An older child may carry more water. A neighbour may help prepare the wagon. A relative may stay beside the sick person while the rest of the camp is dismantled. The same household has less labour but nearly the same workload. That is why illness is not only a medical problem. It is logistical. Suppose the sick person cannot walk. Now they may need to ride. That puts more weight in the wagon. Perhaps goods have to be rearranged. Perhaps someone else walks who normally rides. Perhaps the wagon moves more slowly. If the illness becomes severe, the family may stop entirely. And we already know what stopping means. Food continues disappearing. Animals still need grazing. Weather keeps changing. The season keeps advancing. One person's fever can become a calendar problem for the entire family. Wagon trains sometimes faced hard decisions about whether everyone could wait. Groups were not military units with one fixed rule. Organisation varied, and families retained a great deal of independence. But cooperation mattered. People nursed neighbours, shared medicines, helped with children, managed livestock, dug graves, waited when they could. Human survival often depended on these informal networks. There is no spare hospital travelling behind the wagons. The nearest available medical support may simply be another emigrant who has seen the illness before. Sometimes there were physicians among emigrant parties. That helped. It did not give them modern tools. A doctor could observe symptoms, offer treatments available at the time, and provide experience. But there were no antibiotics for bacterial infections, no intravenous fluids, no modern intensive care, no quick laboratory diagnosis. Sometimes the most important treatment for dehydration would have been fluid replacement. Yet understanding exactly what was happening inside the body was limited. The medical world itself was still changing. Then come injuries. A person can fall beneath a wagon. A firearm can discharge accidentally. An animal can kick. A knife can slip. A hand can be crushed while repairing a wheel. A child can fall. Burns can happen around cooking fires. Again, the popular story sometimes emphasizes attacks from outside the wagon train. Daily work is dangerous enough on its own. A loaded wagon wheel weighs what it weighs. An ox does not become less powerful because you are tired. An axe does not care that you have been walking since sunrise. Fatigue increases risk, and everyone is tired. Even small wounds require attention because dirt is everywhere. There is no sterile treatment room. Your hands are dusty. Clothing is dusty. Tools are dusty. The ground is dusty. A cut that would be a minor inconvenience at home can become more troublesome if it becomes infected. People clean and bind wounds as best they can. Some heal, some do not. Then there are fevers with causes emigrants may not understand. Respiratory illness, measles in some groups, other infectious diseases moving through crowded populations. The exact disease profile changes by year, route, and population, but the larger pattern is steady. Travel places stressed bodies into uncertain sanitary conditions. That creates vulnerability. Children may be especially difficult to protect. They need food and water just like adults, but have smaller reserves when severe illness strikes. Parents cannot isolate them neatly from camp life. They sleep near siblings, ride or walk near others, share food and water systems. If one becomes sick, care becomes constant. Now imagine caring for a feverish child at night. The fire has burned low. The wagon canvas moves slightly in the wind. You are listening to their breathing. Around you, other families sleep. Tomorrow's departure time suddenly feels unimportant. This is where all the grand language of migration disappears. There is no destiny, no frontier, no westward expansion. Only a parent trying to decide whether a child is getting worse. That is history at human scale. And when morning comes, the practical questions return. Can they travel? Should you wait? Is there cleaner water ahead? Does anyone have medicine? Can another family help? What food will they tolerate? How much water can you get into them? The trail demands decisions before you have certainty. Sometimes people recover, sometimes surprisingly quickly. Strength returns. The wagon moves. The frightening night becomes another story carried west. Sometimes it does not end that way. Graves along overland routes were part of the landscape of migration. Death was not constant for every family, but it was common enough to be familiar. Burial could be hurried because the group still had to travel. The living could not remain indefinitely. That fact is difficult, but it does not need embellishment. A family loses someone. Then eventually the wagon moves again. Because food is still being eaten, the animals still need grass. Winter is still coming, and surviving members still have to reach Oregon. What keeps the household functioning after that kind of loss is not heroic individual strength alone. It is work redistributed among whoever remains, including, very often, the children. Children do not get to be passengers for very long. Not on this journey. A child may begin the day sleepy, cold, and wrapped in a blanket. But once camp starts moving, the household needs hands. Small hands count too. That does not mean every child performs the same work, or that young children are treated like miniature adults in every family. Age, health, strength, family size, and circumstance all matter. But the larger pattern is clear. Everyone who can help usually does. You can see why the wagon is not just transportation. It is a travelling household, barn, pantry, workshop, kitchen, and storage room. That creates chores. Constantly, someone has to gather fuel, someone has to fetch water, someone has to help with animals, someone has to watch younger children, someone has to collect dropped items, carry small loads, help prepare food, shake out bedding, and assist with camp. Adults handle the hardest work. Children fill the gaps. And there are many gaps. Imagine you are 12 years old. Old enough to walk most of the day. Old enough to be useful. Too young to control the whole journey. You wake when everyone else wakes. The morning may already be cold. You help gather bedding. Maybe you hold a younger sibling while your mother or father works. Perhaps you carry a bucket. Perhaps you look for chips or wood for the fire. Breakfast comes, then the camp folds inward. Pots disappear into the wagon. Blankets are rolled. Animals are gathered. The wagon cover is checked. Someone calls. The train begins moving. You walk for hours. This is one of the hardest details for a modern listener to picture. Children on the Oregon Trail were not simply seated beneath the wagon cover watching the landscape pass. Many walked beside the wagons for substantial stretches because wagon space and animal strength mattered. Every person who walks is weight the team does not have to pull. So even a child's legs become part of the transportation system. That does not make the walking easy. The ground may be muddy, or dusty, or rocky. Boots sweat, feet blister, clothing gets wet. Heat becomes exhausting. Cold makes fingers stiff, and a child still gets hungry on schedule. Then the train stops. The day's walking is over. The chores are not. Water again. Fuel again. Food again. Animals again. The same survival systems repeat every evening. Children learn routines because routines save effort. You do not need a long discussion about what happens after camp is chosen. Someone knows where the kettle goes. Someone gathers fuel. Someone starts helping with supper. Someone takes care of a younger child. Someone looks for missing livestock. The work becomes familiar. That familiarity matters. A family does not survive months of difficult travel by reinventing every day. It survives by turning necessary work into habit. Children become part of that habit. Older children may help drive or manage livestock. They can help herd loose animals. They can carry messages between wagons. They can gather buffalo chips on treeless plains. They can assist with cooking. They can look after younger siblings while adults handle more demanding tasks. They can help unload and reload small items. They can hold tools. They can fetch. That word becomes important. Fetch. A surprising amount of survival is someone walking to get something. Water. Fuel. A rope. A tool. A missing animal. A child can save an adult time simply by being the person who goes. And time is always valuable. There is another reason children's labour matters. Illness redistributes work. Suppose one parent becomes sick. The tasks remain. Food still needs cooking. Animals still need care. The wagons still needs loading. Younger children still need watching. Now an older child may suddenly be asked to do more than yesterday, not because the family has made a philosophical decision about childhood, because someone has to do it. The Oregon Trail has a way of making necessity very persuasive. Children also experience the same resource limits as adults. Food shortages affect them. Bad water affects them. Cold affects them. Disease affects them. But they have less control over the decisions that create or solve those problems. A child cannot decide to buy another ox. A child cannot choose the route. A child cannot usually decide when the family rests. They live inside decisions made by adults and inside conditions created by the landscape. That can make their experience especially vulnerable. And yet children adapt. They play when they can. They notice strange landscapes. They become accustomed to animals, camps, wagons, river crossings, and long days outdoors. The trail is hardship, but it is also daily life. That distinction matters. If every moment were treated as a disaster, no one could function for months. Most days are not catastrophic. Most days are work. Wake. Pack. Walk. Eat. Walk. Camp. Work again. Sleep. Repeat. For children, that repetition may become strangely normal. A river crossing that terrifies a modern viewer may be the fourth difficult crossing a child has seen. A wagon repair may be frustrating but familiar. Sleeping on the ground may stop feeling unusual. The extraordinary becomes routine. Mostly, there are still moments that break the routine. A child becomes sick. A family member dies. An animal is lost. A storm destroys a calm evening. A wagon overturns. Those moments remind everyone how fragile the system remains. But after the crisis, the chores return. That is one of the quiet truths of family survival. Grief does not gather firewood. Someone still has to. Children also help preserve a sense of family life. Meals are still shared. Stories are still told. Arguments still happen. Someone complains. Someone laughs. A younger child asks how much farther. Again. Probably not for the last time. Those ordinary moments matter because survival is not only the prevention of death, it is the preservation of enough normal life that people can keep functioning. A family that can still organise breakfast, care for children, find missing shoes, settle small arguments, and prepare for departure has retained structure. Structure reduces confusion. Confusion wastes time. And the trail punishes wasted time. You can see how even childhood fits inside the larger mechanism now. Children walk, so the animals carry less. Children fetch, so adults can keep working. Children watch younger siblings, so another adult can repair or cook. Children help with livestock, so the wagon can depart sooner. Small contributions accumulate. Just like small delays, that is the surprising balance of the trail. Tiny problems can become large when repeated. Tiny acts of labour can do the same in the other direction. A bucket carried once does not save a family. A bucket carried every day matters. So does a bundle of fuel. A younger sibling watched for an hour. A loose ox noticed before it wanders farther. A pot washed. A blanket rolled. Nothing heroic. Again. By evening, you are tired. You have walked farther than you wanted. Your feet hurt. There is dust in your clothing. Someone gives you another small job before supper. Perhaps you object. Fair enough. Then you do it. Because everyone around you is tired too. The family survives not because one strong adult carries everyone else across the continent. It survives because work is divided, shifted, repeated, and absorbed by whoever can manage it. And that becomes even more important when the people beside your wagon are not relatives at all. A neighbour lends a tool. Someone helps lift a wheel. Another family shares food. A stranger helps guide livestock through a difficult crossing. The next layer of survival is larger than the household. It is the people travelling around it. By now, you know exactly how much one household can do. Quite a lot. But not everything. A wagon can break in a way your tools cannot fix. An ox can disappear when two adults are already exhausted. A child can become sick while supper still needs cooking. A riverbank can be too steep for one team. This is where the people around you stop being scenery. They become part of the survival system. Wagon trains varied in size and organisation. Some groups were loosely connected. Others elected officers, adopted rules, or travelled under more formal agreements. Families could leave one company and join another. People quarrelled about pace, routes, camps, and decisions. So the trail was not one long festival of cheerful cooperation. Mostly, it was practical. You help because someday you may need help. That is enough. Imagine a wheel has sunk deep into mud. Your team pulls. Nothing useful happens. The oxen strain. The wheel stays where it is. Now people from another wagon walk over. Someone brings a shovel. Someone else brings a rope or chain. A second team may be hitched on if conditions allow. Several people push while the animals pull. The wagon moves a few inches. Then more. Finally, the wheel climbs out. That problem belonged to your family for 10 minutes. Then it belonged to everyone nearby. This is one of the central advantages of travelling in company. Labour can be multiplied. A wagon is full of tasks that become easier when more bodies are available. Lifting a wagon to inspect a wheel, holding a damaged part steady, guiding animals, moving a heavy load, crossing a difficult bank, searching for lost livestock, watching children while adults deal with a problem. One family has limited strength. 10 families have options. Tools work the same way. You do not need every household to own every possible tool if someone nearby has what is missing. Perhaps another traveller has the right wrench, a stronger chain, a saw, a spare bolt, a better axe. The object may be ordinary. Its location matters. When the nearest town is days away, the difference between "we do not have one" and "the wagon behind us has one" can be enormous. Knowledge can be borrowed too. One traveller may understand livestock better. Another may have repaired wheels before. Someone may know how to judge a ford. Someone has heard that a particular water source ahead is poor. Information moves through conversation, around fires, while walking, at crossings, between wagon companies passing in opposite directions. This information is imperfect. Rumours travel too. A shortcut may sound wonderful because someone heard it from someone else. A river may be described as easy when conditions have already changed. So people still have to judge. But in a world without instant communication, another traveller can function like a moving notice board. How is the road ahead? Is there water? How far to the next fort? How bad is the mud? Did you see grass? These are not casual questions. They are route planning. Food can also move between households. A family with plenty of one item may exchange it for something else. Someone may lend or sell provisions. Neighbours may share food during illness or temporary shortage. The exact amount of generosity varies because everyone is protecting limited supplies. A family with 6 weeks of flour left cannot behave as though it has 6 years. Helping another family carries a cost. And yet refusing every request carries a different cost. You may need that family tomorrow. So cooperation often sits between kindness and self-interest. The two are not opposites. They can work together. Suppose someone in a nearby wagon becomes seriously ill. Their family has fewer working adults now. Another traveller may help drive. Someone may bring water. Someone may cook. Another family may watch children. A person with medical experience may come over. None of this cures the disease automatically, but it prevents one illness from collapsing every other task at the same time. You preserve the household around the sick person. The same is true after a death. A grieving family may still need help with animals, packing, or children. The train cannot erase the loss. It can absorb some of the work. For a while. Then there are river crossings. This is where cooperation becomes visibly mechanical. People test the route. Ropes are prepared. Animals are guided. Others stand ready. A difficult climb on the far side may require extra teams. One family learns from the crossing before it. Where did the wheels sink? Which line was shallower? Did the current push the wagon downstream? What needs to be raised inside the box? The first wagon pays for the information. The next one uses it. By the 10th crossing, the group may know the difficult spots well. Unless the river changes, which it can, still, travelling together reduces the amount each family has to discover alone. Night changes too. Livestock may need guarding. Loose animals can wander. Storms can create confusion. A group can divide attention better than one isolated household. Someone awake can notice movement. Someone can help gather animals before they disappear into darkness. Again, nothing glamorous. Just more eyes. That can be enough. But cooperation has limits. Wagon companies could split over disagreements. Some travellers wanted a faster pace. Others needed more rest. A family with strong animals might become impatient with one whose team was failing. People argued about leadership, routes, whether to wait, and where to camp. Long travel does not transform human beings into perfectly patient neighbours. If anything, fatigue gives everyone more opportunities to be irritating. This matters because mutual aid is not the same as permanent unity. A group may help you fix a wheel today and leave before you tomorrow. A neighbour may lend a tool but refuse to wait another full day. A company may reorganise. Families may separate and later join others. The social structure is flexible because the trail keeps changing everyone's needs, and that flexibility can be useful. If your pace no longer matches the group, you may move differently. If another company offers better compatibility, you may join it. The journey creates temporary communities. They form, they help, they argue, they divide, they reform. What holds them together is not always friendship. Often, it is shared vulnerability. Everyone has a wagon that can break. Everyone has animals that can weaken. Everyone is watching the season. That creates a kind of practical equality. A wealthy family may own more goods, but a broken axle can still stop a wealthy wagon. A swollen river can still delay everyone. And when 4 people are needed to lift something, status does not reduce the weight. By evening, your wagon is moving again because someone else had the tool you needed. Perhaps you repay them with food. Perhaps with labour later. Perhaps with nothing immediately. The account is informal. The trail keeps it open. Then, one morning, you pass a family beside the road. Their load is scattered around them. Their animals look tired. A piece of furniture sits in the dirt. Then, another object. They are lightening the wagon. You understand immediately. Sometimes the most useful thing a neighbour can offer is help. Sometimes even help cannot make a load reasonable, and then survival demands a harsher decision. You leave something behind, not because it is worthless, because continuing west has become worth more. The first abandoned object does not look important. A chair, just sitting beside the trail. No house around it, no porch, no table, no family. Only a wooden chair in the grass while wagons continue west. Then you see another object. A chest. Later. A broken stove. A piece of furniture. Tools. Clothing. Sometimes books. Things that once belonged inside a home now sit in the open because the road has forced a decision. This is one of the clearest corrections to the romantic image of the Oregon Trail. Families did not simply load a miniature household into a covered wagon and carry it intact across the continent. The trail edited the household repeatedly, and the editor was You already know the mechanism. The wagon has limited capacity. The oxen have limited strength. Mud increases resistance. Hills increase resistance. Weak animals reduce pulling power. A damaged wagon tolerates less strain. Every pound that seemed acceptable on level ground in Missouri may feel different after months of travel. So belongings begin to compete with movement. At first, the decisions are easy. Something unnecessary goes. A bulky item, an extra box. Perhaps a piece of furniture that everyone now agrees was a poor idea. No one feels especially tragic about it. Mostly, then the choices get harder. What if the thing is useful? A tool? A cooking vessel? Extra clothing? A book? A family keepsake? Now the question changes. Not, do we want this? Of course you do. The question is, does keeping this make it harder to keep moving? That is much colder. Imagine your team has weakened. The wagon is climbing. The animals strain. The wheels catch in ruts. Someone walks behind, watching the load. Everyone already walks who can. There is no passenger weight left to remove, so the wagon stops. The cover is opened, and the household comes out onto the ground. You begin weighing usefulness against pounds. A cast iron object is extremely useful. It is also extremely cast iron. A heavy chest may contain things the family values deeply. It is still heavy. A tool may save you later. It also has to survive the next mountain first. There is no scale beside the trail telling you exactly what to discard. You estimate. You argue. You choose. Then you leave something. The wagon starts again. If the animals move more easily, the decision has an immediate reward. That can make the next decision easier, which is not necessarily pleasant. The trail can teach you to abandon things very efficiently. This is where the famous piles of discarded goods along overland routes begin to make sense. They were not simply evidence of foolish packing, although some emigrants certainly brought too much. They were also evidence of changing conditions. A load that was reasonable at departure could become unreasonable after an animal died. A wagon could be damaged. A team could weaken. Mud could become severe. A steep grade could expose the problem. The household had to adapt. And because the family cannot reduce the weight of flour below what it needs to eat, or remove the wagon wheel it needs to roll, sentimental property becomes vulnerable. Survival has priorities. Food, water containers, bedding, essential clothing, tools, cooking equipment, things that directly support movement and health. A bureau does not rank well against flour. A chair does not rank well against a blanket. A decorative object has an even harder time making its case. This sounds obvious now. It did not necessarily feel obvious at departure. Back home, furniture represented comfort, status, memory, and the promise of rebuilding familiar life in Oregon. You were not merely moving west. You were trying to carry continuity with you. That is why abandonment matters. The object left beside the road is not only weight removed from a wagon, it can be a piece of the old life removed from the future. A family that reaches Oregon with fewer possessions than it started with has been physically simplified by the journey. There is something almost mechanical about that process. Each crisis strips away another margin. First convenience, then comfort, then value. Eventually, perhaps, things you thought were necessary. The core gets smaller, and what remains tells you what survival truly required. This is also why discarded goods could attract attention from later travelers. An abandoned object might be useless, or it might be exactly what someone else needs. One family leaves a tool because its team is failing. Another family, with stronger animals but a broken wagon part, may see value in it. The trail becomes an accidental exchange system, not organized, not reliable, but practical. Something worthless to a family under one set of constraints may be valuable to another under different ones. Again, context decides. The same is true of wagons themselves. If a vehicle became impossible to repair or the team could no longer pull it, families might consolidate goods with others, shift loads, or abandon more than a few household items. That is a much larger crisis. A wagon is not simply property. It is the structure holding your remaining food, shelter materials, tools, and possessions. Lose the wagon, and the entire survival system has to be reorganized. This is where cooperation can become decisive. Another family may take some goods. A replacement vehicle may be purchased or improvised if one is available. Animals may be traded. Looks may be divided. But every solution has limits, because the helping wagon also has a weight limit. Generosity does not make wood stronger. So even with neighbors willing to help, some things may still stay behind. You begin to understand why the trail could look strangely littered in places. Not because emigrants did not care about their possessions, because they cared more about reaching the destination. That distinction matters. Abandonment is not waste in the ordinary sense. It is triage. You are reducing one kind of loss to prevent another. Leave the stove, and keep the oxen moving. Leave the chest and protect the axle. Leave the furniture and preserve the food. The thing sacrificed is visible. The disaster avoided is invisible. That makes the abandoned object look sadder than the decision may actually have been. You can see the chair. You cannot see the wagon breakdown that did not happen because the load was lighter. You can see the trunk. You cannot see the extra miles the weakened team managed because it was gone. Survival often leaves evidence of what was surrendered, not what was prevented. By late in the journey, this lesson becomes almost instinctive. When the wagon struggles, you do not ask whether every possession still deserves to exist in your future home. You ask what must remain for tomorrow. That question is smaller, cleaner, harsher, and it strips away the mythology of self-sufficient pioneers carrying civilization west in neat little wagons. What you actually see is a moving family constantly renegotiating what it can afford to keep. By evening, the load is lighter. The wagon sits a little higher. The team has eaten. The discarded chest is now somewhere behind you. No one goes back for it. Tomorrow, it may be passed by another family. Perhaps they stop. Perhaps they do not. You keep moving. Because by now, the most important possession is not inside the wagon at all. It is continued progress. And after food shortages, bad water, cold mornings, disease, broken wheels, tired oxen, river crossings, and everything left beside the road, only one question remains. What, in the end, actually got families through? By the time Oregon is finally close enough to feel real, the wagon no longer looks like the one that left Missouri. The canvas is dirtier. The wood is worn. Some objects are gone. The oxen are leaner. The people are too... And that may be the clearest answer to the question we began with. How did Oregon Trail families survive hunger, cold, and broken wagons? Not through one trick. Not through toughness alone. They survived by keeping several fragile systems working at the same time. Food had to last. Water had to be found. Animals had to stay strong enough to pull. The wagon had to remain repairable. People had to stay healthy enough to work. Children had to help. Neighbours had to matter. And when the system became too heavy, too slow, or too fragile, something had to change. Look back at the food first. The family never solved hunger by carrying unlimited provisions. That would have created a different problem. Too much weight? So they packed durable staples, protected them, rationed them, bought more when they could, traded when necessary, hunted where practical, and adjusted meals as supplies changed. The mechanism was balanced. Enough calories to keep people working. Not so much cargo that the animals failed. And when travel slowed, food pressure increased because people still ate while the wagon stood still. That is why a broken wheel and a flour sack were part of the same story. Now look at water. You could not carry enough for the entire journey, especially for the animals. So survival depended on reaching the next source. Creeks, rivers, springs, and wells became pieces of infrastructure supplied by geography rather than built by people. Good water and good grazing could keep the journey moving. Poor water, dry stretches, or contaminated camps could weaken the entire party. Again, no single solution. Only constant adjustment. The oxen revealed the same pattern. They were not simply pulling the wagon. They converted grass and water into movement that made them the living engine of migration. Feed them poorly, overwork them, injure them, or load them beyond reason, and the household slowed. Once they weakened, every extra object became more expensive. This is why families threw things away. The abandoned furniture beside the trail was not always evidence of foolishness. Sometimes it was evidence of correction. The road had changed the equation. So the family changed the load. The wagon itself was another system that survived through maintenance rather than perfection. grease, inspection, tightening, improvised repairs, spare parts, borrowed tools, help from someone who knew more than you did. A wagon did not need to remain beautiful. It needed to remain movable. A temporary brace could be more valuable than a perfect repair in a shop hundreds of miles away. A wheel that turned badly was still better than one that did not turn. Then there was cold. Families did not defeat weather. They adapted to it. Blankets, layered clothing, dry bedding when possible, fire, camp placement, timing. Most importantly, they tried to avoid arriving too late. Cold was dangerous by itself, but it became much worse when combined with weak animals, wet bedding, illness, low food, or lost time. That is one of the central lessons of the entire trail. The dangers multiplied one another. They did not remain separate. A river delay could consume food. Low food could weaken people. Weak people worked less effectively. Slow repairs could cost more days. More days could push the family later into autumn. Later travel could mean colder weather. Cold could weaken animals. Weak animals could force families to abandon possessions. One problem fed the next. Survival meant interrupting those chains before they became impossible to manage. That is why so much of the real story feels ordinary. Checking a wheel, refilling water, drying a blanket, gathering fuel, watching the animals, cooking another simple meal, walking another 12 miles, helping a neighbour lift something. None of those moments looks large enough to explain continental migration. Together, they do. And this also corrects another modern assumption. We often imagine survival stories as tests of individual character. One person endures. One person overcomes. One person becomes heroic. The Oregon Trail was rarely so neat. Families depended on distributed labor. Adults divided work. Children contributed. Neighbors shared tools, information, labor, and sometimes food. Someone else's spare bolt could save your wagon. Someone else's hands could free it from mud. Someone else's knowledge of a crossing could prevent a mistake. Independence mattered, but so did interdependence. That may be the most useful correction of all. The families who reached Oregon were not untouched by the trail. They did not preserve everything. They lost time. They lost goods. Some lost animals. Some lost health. Some lost people they loved. The journey reduced margins again and again. What survived was often not the original plan. It was the ability to keep changing the plan without losing the destination. That is how hunger was survived. Not by never becoming short of food, but by stretching, replacing, protecting, and recalculating. That is how cold was survived. Not by remaining comfortable, but by staying dry where possible, carrying enough protection, keeping the body fed, and moving before the season became worse. That is how broken wagons were survived. Not by owning machinery that never failed, but by repairing, borrowing, improvising, unloading, and sometimes abandoning what could no longer justify its weight. And that is why the Oregon Trail was less a heroic march than a long exercise in practical compromise. Keep what works, fix what breaks, share what you can, drop what you cannot carry, move when conditions allow, wait when they do not, then begin again in the morning. By the end, the family may own less, but it understands the journey more deeply than it ever could at departure. The wagon has taught them the real price of every object. The animals have taught them the real price of every mile. The dwindling food has taught them the real price of every delay. And the weather has taught them that time itself has weight. Now the road is quieter. The hardest crossings are behind you. The last repairs have held. There is still work, but there is no longer a great question hanging over every mile. You know how the family survived. Not perfectly, not comfortably, not alone. They survived because, day after day, they kept the essential things functioning just long enough to reach the next day. The image of the trail can soften now. The wagon is standing still. The wheels no longer need to turn tonight. No one is measuring flour. No one is searching for the next creek. No one is listening for a crack beneath the wagon box. The oxen can lower their heads and rest. The tools can remain where they are. The blankets are enough. The fire does not need to be large, only warm. Around you, the great trail that demanded attention for month after month begins to recede into darkness. The abandoned chairs, the muddy crossings, the thin meals, the cold mornings, the creaking wheels, all of it becomes distant. You do not need to solve any of it now. You are not beside a river. You are not late for a mountain pass. There is no broken axle waiting outside your room. There is no ration to calculate before breakfast. You are here, safe in the present. The wagon can remain where it is. The road can disappear into the dark. Nothing else needs to be carried. Nothing else needs to be repaired. Nothing else needs to be decided tonight. The past has done enough travelling. And so have you.